Here we go, here we go, here we go. He's a loser. Donald Trump is a loser. Donald Trump indicted once again by Special Counsel Jack Smith in the Washington, D.C. election interference trial. And we have some news on the classified documents trial down in Miami, which Jack Smith is jump-starting before we head into the final stretch of this election. I'll get to all of that in a moment, plus Donald Trump's photo op at Arlington Cemetery on Monday, it turned violent. We are getting reports that as the military attempted to stop him from turning the graves of our fallen soldiers into a photo op, Donald Trump's campaign staff and Arlington Cemetery workers were pushing, shoving, and screaming. There's a police report that's been filed. I'll have more on that. Lot to get to. So let's start. J.D. Vance continues to drag Trump down to defeat as new audio emerges in which Vance says teachers who don't have biological children disorient and disturb me. You know, J.D., maybe you're just disoriented and disturbed. Vance complained that Randi Weingarten, the head of the teachers union, doesn't have any children. Vance added, if she wants to destroy and brainwash the minds of children, she should leave our kids alone and do it to her own, but she doesn't have any. Wow. So, according to J.D. Vance, you shouldn't be a teacher unless you have biological children. That means no adopting, okay? No surrogates. They have to come out of your wife's uterus. So hard to believe J.D. Vance is now the most hated politician in America. He's polling worse than Sarah Palin, and I'm not sure she was even human. Fox News host Jesse Waters, who I'm not sure is actually human. Fox News host Jesse Waters warned that Kamala Harris would have a panic attack inside the Situation Room if she ever became president and would be, quote unquote, manhandled by generals who would walk all over her. Jesse Waters over at Fox said, quote, she's going to get paralyzed in the Situation Room while the generals have their way with her. The generals are going to have their way with her. I think Jesse's confusing the Situation Room with the old offices belonging to Roger Ailes and Bill O'Reilly. How many tens of millions of dollars did Fox News have to pay to Bill O'Reilly's accusers? Well, after hearing Jesse Waters' comments, the former wife of Doug Emhoff, Kirsten Emhoff, said, quote, there are many things to worry about, but Kamala being manhandled in the Situation Room is not one of them. More bad news for Donald Trump. As we know, he wants our economy to plunge into darkness right before Election Day. Sadly for him, that's not happening. The stock market continues to hit record highs. And while unemployment is ticking up slightly, inflation is 1% away from exactly where the chairman of the Federal Reserve, Jerome Powell, wants it, which is why he's going to be lowering interest rates next month. And now the Conference Board, which measures consumer confidence each month, the Conference Board issued their monthly report showing Americans are now more optimistic about the economy than they've been all year. American consumers now say they think the economy will continue to improve over the next 6 months. They also express confidence that the job market will improve. Bad news for Donald Trump, because throughout the year, for some reason, Trump has been polling way ahead of Biden and now Harris on the question, who do you think is better equipped to handle the economy? The Biden campaign had been counting on Americans eventually waking up to how much better they are now than they were 4 years ago. With Kamala Harris now topping the ticket with a joyful enthusiasm, that joyful enthusiasm seems to be creeping into consumer confidence. Remember, 2/3 of our economy is what you and I purchase. Lack of consumer confidence is one of the leading indicators of an impending recession, which, much to Donald Trump's chagrin, is not about to happen. 200 former Republican staffers for John McCain, the Republican nominee for president in 2008, Mitt Romney, the Republican nominee in 2012, and President George W. Bush, 200 of their staffers signed an open letter yesterday endorsing Kamala Harris for president. They wrote, quote, "We have plenty of honest ideological disagreements with Vice President Harris and Governor Walz. That's to be expected. The alternative, however, is simply untenable." They're saying Donald Trump is untenable. Mitt Romney and George W. Bush failed to appear at last month's GOP convention in Milwaukee. Romney, who retires from politics at the end of this year, has already said he's not voting for Trump, specifically because of the E. Jean Carroll decision. Meanwhile, George W. Bush refuses to say who he's voting for, insisting it's his obligation to stay out of presidential politics. Well, George, it was also your obligation to stay out of Iraq and Afghanistan, but that didn't stop you. War criminal. Violence, speaking of war criminals and soldiers dying unnecessarily, violence between Trump campaign staffers and officials at Arlington National Cemetery on Monday. Just when you think Donald Trump couldn't sink any lower and alienate our military, violence at Arlington Cemetery as he and his campaign staffers demanded Arlington break the rules and allow him a photo op. Some background on this before I tell you what happened on Monday. Earlier this month, the former president denigrated the Congressional Medal of Honor, which pays tribute to our soldiers. He said it doesn't compare to the Presidential Medal of Freedom because Trump said the Congressional Medal of Honor is depressing. He says it's depressing because it only is awarded, he said, to soldiers who are either dead or severely wounded. He said that. He also, according to Trump's former chief of staff, John Kelly, whose son died in battle, Trump's former chief of staff, General John Kelly, has publicly recounted private conversations where Trump referred to American soldiers buried at Arlington Cemetery and in France as losers. Trump supporters write to me and say that's not true. They insist that 19 former Trump White House officials say that General Kelly is lying and that Trump never said that to him. How do they know? It was in a private conversation. How does anyone know what transpired between General Kelly and Donald Trump while visiting France and Arlington Cemetery? It was a private conversation. It's Trump's word versus General Kelly's word. Who do you trust? Some of you might remember back in 2017 when 4 soldiers were killed in Africa. Trump was our commander-in-chief at the time, and when he called one of the widows to pay his condolences, he reportedly said to her, quote, "Well, it's sad, but your husband, he knew what he was signing up for," unquote. The widow added that Trump didn't even know the name of her husband who had just fallen on the battlefield. The conversation was overheard by Frederica Wilson, the Democratic Congresswoman from Florida, who, along with the widow's mother, said they couldn't believe how cavalier and flippant Donald Trump sounded during that condolence call, where he didn't even know the name of the fallen soldier. Well, they shouldn't have been surprised, especially since a year previously, Trump attacked two Gold Star parents who spoke before the 2016 Democratic Convention criticizing Trump for questioning the loyalties of Muslim Americans. The couple's son, a Muslim, they said, made the ultimate sacrifice for our country serving in our military. Trump, while running for president in 2016, attacked that couple, called them liars, and said the only reason the wife stood there at the convention but didn't speak is because under Muslim law, under Sharia law, she must remain silent in public. You cannot get any worse than this. This is a commander-in-chief. And so, sinking in the polls, Trump attempting to repair damages with the veterans made an appearance on Monday at Arlington Cemetery to commemorate the third anniversary of Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan. Okay? Trump was turning Arlington Cemetery into a photo op. It's against the law. Trump showed up with reporters and a wreath heading for Section 60. Now, if you don't know what Section 60 is, it is a sacred burial ground where our most recent casualties of war are buried. Nobody is permitted to use it as a photo op or even take pictures. Arlington Cemetery only permits cemetery workers to take photographs. NPR is reporting this morning that Arlington Cemetery confirms there was an incident, shoving and shouting, maybe hitting, between Trump campaign staffers and those working at Arlington Cemetery, trying to stop them from turning Section 60 into a photo op. A police report has been filed. Arlington Cemetery, it's like once again, just when you think you cannot, and wait, it's going to get worse. I'm going to show you the photo op in a second. Just when you think Trump has hit the bottom, he's like fracking the bottom. He's found new depths to reach. Arlington issued this statement following this physical altercation on Monday between Trump's campaign staff and Arlington Cemetery workers. Quote, this is from Arlington Cemetery. Federal law prohibits political campaign or election-related activities within Army National Military cemeteries to include photographers, content creators, or any other persons attending for purposes or in direct support of a partisan political candidate's campaign. Arlington National Cemetery reinforced and widely shared this law and its prohibitions with all participants from the Trump campaign on Monday. I mean, and now it gets worse. He got his photo op. I blurred out the names of the soldiers on the tombstones. The Trump campaign pushed through the cemetery officials, violating all laws, protocols, and decency, and turned sacred ground into a photo op. I mean, look at this. Have you ever? This is Donald Trump standing alongside relatives of the last 13 soldiers to be killed in Afghanistan. I've blurred their names. You can't read the tombstones. It was nothing but a political stunt, drawing attention to the third-year anniversary of Biden pulling out of Afghanistan, which Trump insists is the greatest foreign policy blunder in American history. It wasn't. Now, I'm going to say some things now, and you may not like it, but it's the truth, okay? You may not like what I'm about to tell you about Biden ending our 20-year war in Afghanistan, where the war in Afghanistan is where we took on the Taliban, even though they had absolutely nothing to do with 9/11. That is why Osama bin Laden was killed in Pakistan. I know people don't like to hear this. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan, Saudi Arabia and Pakistan were behind 9/11, not Iraq and not Afghanistan. The Taliban had nothing to do with 9/11. Al-Qaeda was hiding out in Tora Bora because the Taliban at the time were a failed state. Remember, Bush said Afghanistan is a failed state and the Taliban cannot control Afghanistan. They couldn't control Al-Qaeda. There were 20 different tribes and warlords that the Taliban had been taking on. They had nothing to do with Osama bin Laden, who was going back and forth between the hills of Afghanistan and Pakistan. So Biden didn't bungle the exit from Afghanistan. Bush bungled Afghanistan by going in there, and President Obama bungled it by staying there and perpetuating the lie that Afghanistan attacked us on 9/11. If you remember, in 2008, President Obama was running for office saying, we don't belong in Iraq. George W. Bush took his eye off the ball by ignoring the people who attacked us on 9/11, Afghanistan. That, I'm sorry, was a lie. President Obama lied when he said the Taliban was behind 9/11. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan were behind 9/11. Afghanistan had nothing to do with it. Again, why was Osama bin Laden killed in Pakistan? And why is the doctor who assisted the CIA in finding Osama bin Laden in 2011, why have the Pakistani people locked that doctor up? Pakistan, Saudi Arabia. This is why we lost Afghanistan. The Taliban had nothing to do with 9/11. Do you see how dangerous it is to have a stupid country? Do you see why it's dangerous for the American people to be this stupid? Well, they have to be this stupid. Otherwise, they wouldn't agree to spending $1 trillion a year on weapons to fight imaginary enemies. That's why we lost in Afghanistan. And I know people don't like to hear this. Biden knew the Taliban had nothing to do with Afghanistan. He wanted Obama to pull out during the first term. He said, let's get out of Iraq and let's get out of Afghanistan. When you lose a war, leaving is never easy. Of course it was going to be a disaster. The whole war was a disaster. Biden didn't bungle anything. He ended our involvement fighting a country that didn't attack us on 9/11. But because we're a stupid country, here is Donald Trump's photo op in front of the graves of our soldiers. I've blurred out their names, okay? Look at him. Look at this. Look at this monster. This is what you get when you're a stupid country. You get Donald Trump turning sacred hallowed ground, Arlington Cemetery, into a photo op. Look at him smiling with his thumbs up. It's just another campaign stop. Yes, the man is demented, but the American people are stupid that they would allow this. Look at him. It's like he's breaking new ground for the opening of a brand new casino. Zero solemnity, zero recognition of where he is standing. It's just a photo op to convince the MAGA morons he loves the troops. And yes, Trump's voters are much dumber than the people voting for Kamala Harris. But how many Democrats still believe that the Taliban attacked us on 9/11? Look at him. Look at this. This is Arlington Cemetery, and they try to stop him. Just like on January 6th. We're not going to listen to the people from Arlington Cemetery. We want our photo op. We want our photo op. This is Donald Trump's first wife, Ivana, with their 3 idiot children. You might remember Ivana as Donald Trump's original KGB handler. I don't know. Was she? Ivana died in 2022 after falling down a flight of stairs. And I believe that. I do. I believe she fell down a flight of steps. Donald had her buried out by the back 9 inside his Bedminster, New Jersey golf course. Look at this. Look, this is his first wife, the mother of his 3 idiot children. No bench, no flowers, covered in grass, unmanicured. Look at this. This is her gravestone. You see that? The Daily Mail took these pictures. Unbelievable. Well, actually, it's not. It's not unbelievable. He has zero respect for the mother of his 3 children. Why would you expect him to have any respect for complete strangers buried in Arlington Cemetery? Men and women who he refers to as losers. Okay, this is the mop. I got a lot to get to. This is the mop-up for August 28th, 2024. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you so much for finding me this morning. Please like this episode so I remain in your feed. That's what I'm told. So you don't miss any episodes. If you like this, you'll get more of it. And of course, subscribe to my newsletter, subscribe to this channel, and hit the notifications bell so you are always alerted when I'm about to spew hatred and garbage when I go live. And if you would like a transcript of this episode, I publish all transcripts of my show now because I want to be held accountable. I don't think podcasts, radio, and television are trustworthy media because you just say it and it goes out into the ether. Facts, you harvest facts through the printed word, okay? And that's why I make transcripts of my shows available. They're not altered. If I make a mistake, you can read it. If I get something wrong, you can read it in the transcripts and correct me by going to shopdavidfeldman.com. By the way, I was slightly wrong. I said that Don Jr.'s fiancée, Kimberly Gargoyle, got paid $30,000 to deliver a 3-minute speech on the ellipse, January 6th, opening up for Donald Trump. I said she got paid $30,000 to deliver a 3-minute speech on January 6th before Donald Trump incited an insurrection. I was wrong. She was paid $60,000 for that 3-minute speech, and it came out of Charlie Kirk's pocket from Turning Point's USA. So I stand corrected. It wasn't $30,000. It was $60,000. Well, if you would like a transcript of today's episode, go to shopdavidfeldman.com and feel free to correct me. These transcripts are free thanks to the idiots who buy garbage over at shopdavidfeldman.com, like this coffee mug. It's a souvenir of the 2016 why do I keep calling this the oh no. I keep calling this the 2016 presidential election. Oh boy. It's the 2024 presidential election, I hope. And this is my worst case scenario map showing that it is impossible for Kamala Harris to lose. She's guaranteed 270 electoral votes. That's all you need. And she's guaranteed 270 electoral votes, just like Hillary was going to win in 26. No, it's going to be different. I'm going to talk about that. And you can pick up a David Ferdman coffee mug. David Ferdman, my nephew Leonard misspelled Feldman, but he got David and show correctly. So please go to shopdavidfeldman.com and, of course, share this episode. The most important thing you can do for me if you enjoy any of this, especially the part about how the Taliban didn't attack us on 9/11 and that our 20-some-odd-year war in Afghanistan wasn't what they told us it was. Please share that. I know that pisses people off. I understand that because so much was lost. But so much will be lost again if Americans remain stupid and don't realize that it wasn't just Iraq that didn't attack us on 9/11, it was Afghanistan that also didn't attack us on 9/11. It was Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Tulsi Gabbard served in the Army as a lieutenant colonel. She still is in the reserves. She's a former Democratic congresswoman from Hawaii, as well as a 2020 presidential candidate. She quit the Democratic Party after Joe Biden was elected, and on Tuesday, Tulsi Gabbard officially endorsed Donald Trump for president. As I reported earlier, Gabbard is already serving as one of Trump's debate coaches, prepping him for the ABC showdown with Kamala Harris on September 10th. I'll be hosting a watch party again, more details to come. Gabbard, according to the Financial Times, is on record defending Vladimir Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. She's also on record defending the brutal regime of Syrian leader Bashar al-Assad. She quit the Democratic Party 2 years ago, citing as one of her reasons the party's quote-unquote anti-white racism. She campaigned in the 2022 midterms on behalf of J.D. Vance and Kari Lake. Gabbard also came out in support of Florida's infamous Don't Say Gay bill, which purports to give parents more say in their child's education. Yes, that's what we need. Parents from Florida having more say in how their kids get educated. An interview that Robert F. Kennedy Jr.'s 36-year-old daughter, Kik, once gave to Town and Country magazine has resurfaced, where she said her father, where her father once took a chainsaw to the head of a beached whale, tied it to the top of the family minivan, and drove it home as whale juice poured all over the highway, other cars, and inside the van. She said people were giving her the finger, and she said the inside of the minivan stunk. You couldn't go into Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s minivan because he was constantly picking up dead animals. Kik Kennedy said her father stored the head of the dead whale in the family freezer, which she said was overflowing with roadkill. According to Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s daughter, Kik Kennedy, her dad would often pull over to the side of the road whenever he spotted a dead animal, and then he would bring it home to store in the Kennedy family freezer. Somebody should check Bobby Kennedy Jr.'s freezer. I'm not saying we'd find the body of Jimmy Hoffa. I'm just saying they should check. Kik Kennedy said her father kept the freezer filled because he's obsessed with animal skulls and likes to analyze them. Somebody should analyze his skull. Well, he's endorsed Donald Trump, who is obligated right now to set up a transition team to vet potential hires for his new administration should the impossible occur and he wins in November. On Tuesday, Donald Trump named Tulsi Gabbard and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to head his transition team. Gabbard and Kennedy are the most qualified to run Donald Trump's transition team since both of them make their homes in a small, gated community called Crazy Town. I hope you never have to visit the small, gated community called Crazy Town, where Donald Trump is the honorary mayor. As mentioned earlier, Donald Trump indicted once again in the Washington, D.C. election interference trial. It was somewhat unexpected coming this close to November 5th. After Labor Day, it's the Justice Department's official policy not to indict any politician so close to Election Day. I'll have more about that later because it's really important. But in a string of mounting troubles, August is turning out to be the cruelest month for Donald Trump. Just wait till he sees what November has in store for him. We have lots of news coming out of Jack Smith's office this morning. He is the special counsel who indicted Donald Trump in Washington, D.C. for election interference. And he also indicted Trump down in Miami for violating the Espionage Act when Trump refused to return boxes of classified documents after leaving office. There's news on both those trials this morning. See, I'm learning After Effects and Photoshop, and that looks like a cover of Andy Warhol's Interview magazine. That is not right. I apologize. Much better. So let's begin with the election interference case against Donald Trump. Let me just show you my, I've been painting. I shouldn't be doing this, but I've been learning how to paint video faces. This is J.D. Vance's face. I'm sorry, but I'm learning After Effects, and you can now paint faces on, and I should be focusing on more important things. I apologize. Okay. All right. Sip of coffee. Where are we in the show? 33 minutes into the show, and already I'm cracking up. Okay, let's begin with the election interference case against Donald Trump, who was indicted once again Tuesday with a brand new grand jury charging him with conspiracy to defraud the United States government following his 2020 election loss to Joe Biden. Now, in accordance with the Supreme Court, okay? Remember the Supreme Court's June ruling on presidential immunity? Special Counsel Jack Smith, with this brand new superseding indictment, he appears to have tossed out an old indictment charging Trump. The old indictment charged Trump with pressuring the Justice Department into assisting him in overturning the election by spreading the lie that they had uncovered evidence of voter fraud. The Supreme Court specified in their June ruling that Trump's pressure campaign inside the Justice Department, his attempt to convince the acting Attorney General and others inside the Justice Department to lie about voter fraud, that activity, according to our Supreme Court, falls under the protective umbrella of official presidential duties. In other words, the Supreme Court ruled back in June that when a president orders his Justice Department to help him overturn an election, to stage a mini coup, according to the Supreme Court, that is an official act, and he can't be prosecuted for trying to steal an election. I'll help you with all this in a little while, because it's precisely why Donald Trump can never be allowed anywhere near the Oval Office, and Kamala Harris has to nominate all future Supreme Court justices. So, if an evidentiary hearing in the Washington, D.C. election interference trial takes place before November 5th, what effect would that have politically? It's hard to say. I don't think it's necessary for Donald Trump to come off the campaign trail to attend these hearings, but he will want to. You might remember during his Manhattan criminal trial in May, Trump requested permission from the judge to attend an evidentiary hearing in the Washington, D.C. election interference trial that Special Counsel Jack Smith was still prosecuting before the Supreme Court shut it down. Judge Juan Merchan, presiding over the Manhattan criminal trial, turned down Trump's request. He ruled it was mandatory for Trump to attend the criminal trial here in Manhattan because the jury was already seated. Judge Merchan ruled Trump's attendance at an evidentiary hearing in D.C. wasn't mandatory because he would only be an observer as opposed to Trump's Manhattan criminal trial, where he was a participant. So, with these new indictments coming down on Tuesday, if there is a pretrial hearing scheduled before Election Day, there would be absolutely no need for Trump to attend. But Trump will want to be there because he has succeeded in turning his prosecutions into political theater that give him a boost in both the polls and donations. Trump was found guilty in that Manhattan criminal trial at the very end of May. While that trial was taking place throughout all of May, Trump was finally closing the fundraising gap with Joe Biden, and his poll numbers surged in the swing states. Then in June, after Trump was found guilty, donations to the Trump campaign leveled off, and Biden began to creep up in the polls, with something approaching a dead heat heading into the June 27th presidential debate. And we all know what happened after that. The point I'm making is when Donald Trump is on trial, he successfully plays the martyr, and the American people, or at least some, respond. Later on, I'll have more on these new indictments Tuesday. These are the indictments in the election interference trial in Washington, D.C., and I'll spell out what kind of timetable we can expect after Donald Trump loses in November, and it's not going to be good for Donald Trump. I'm going to show you why Trump may not be going to prison anytime soon, but he will be spending most of his 80s sitting in a courtroom racking up unimaginably gigantic legal bills. More on that later. But first, let's now turn to Trump's other criminal trial, the slam dunk. This is the easiest trial of all four criminal trials, this is the easiest, where he was charged with violating the Espionage Act. Look what he did in Arlington Cemetery on Monday. He's been indicted. Am I dreaming? Is this, can this be real? Seriously. Donald Trump was indicted for violating the Espionage Act. You might remember Special Counsel Jack Smith indicted Donald Trump. And this is a slam dunk. He's going to lose this if it ever gets to trial. Jack Smith indicted Donald Trump on 42 criminal counts for violating the Espionage Act when Trump was, and obstruction of justice, when Trump was caught on tape. Caught on tape. You heard the tapes of him sharing classified war plans with complete strangers at his Bedminster, New Jersey golf course. Instead of returning those documents to the National Archives after he left office, he carried them from Mar-a-Lago up to Bedminster, New Jersey. He paid more attention to those boxes of classified documents than he did to the unmarked grave of the mother of his 3 children, also at Bedminster. He was obsessed with his boxes. They were his memory boxes. He was always showing classified documents to strangers to prove how important I am. The presiding judge in the classified documents case is Aileen Cannon, who was appointed by Donald Trump in 2020. She has been slow walking this trial from the time she got it. And she finally decided to throw the entire case out, ruling that the Office of Special Counsel is unconstitutional. She did this over the summer, and Trump celebrated this as a victory, announcing, "I was found innocent." No, you're an idiot, and you're a liar, and you violated the Espionage Act. So on Monday, Special Counsel Jack Smith stood before an appeals court in Washington, D.C., urging a panel of judges to overturn Judge Aileen Cannon's ruling. In his 60-page brief, Special Counsel Jack Smith argued that Attorney General Merrick Garland was well within his authority to appoint him as a special counsel, and Judge Cannon's ruling, if upheld, could jeopardize the work of other special counsels working throughout the country. I know this is a lot to process. Aileen Cannon threw out the classified documents case because she said the job of special counsel, Jack Smith's job, is unconstitutional. Okay? Because Aileen Cannon is such a constitutional scholar. Okay? So it's ludicrous, but so was the claim of presidential immunity, and it found its way all the way up to the Supreme Court, and we know how that turned out. So let me explain this, because there is a 6-3 conservative fascist majority in our Supreme Court looking for any reason, any excuse to protect Donald Trump. It is no longer inconceivable to imagine this Supreme Court shutting down the special counsel's office to protect Donald Trump. Now, for decades, attorney generals have appointed special counsels to make sure a politically charged investigation will be immune from any appearance of interference or impropriety by the attorney general, who serves at the pleasure of the president. The attorney general, in many ways, is a political appointment, right? John Mitchell was Richard Nixon's campaign manager, and then he ended up being appointed attorney general. So special counsels make a political witch hunt or the weaponization of the Justice Department less likely, if not impossible. That's why there are special counsels. So where did Judge Aileen Cannon get the idea that special counsels are unconstitutional? from this genius, Clarence Thomas. Clarence Thomas, who's taken at least $4 million in gifts from wealthy Republican billionaires who donate to the Trump campaign. Clarence Thomas has accepted more gifts from wealthy donors than the entire Supreme Court combined. In the history of the Supreme Court, the $4 million that we know of that Clarence Thomas has accepted in gifts, if you add up all the gifts that every Supreme Court justice took since the Constitution was signed, Clarence Thomas took more than all of them combined. Clarence Thomas, back in June, this is where Eileen Cannon got this idea that special counsels are unconstitutional. Back in June, the Supreme Court's conservative majority ruled 6-3 that ex-presidents like Donald Trump retain some immunity from prosecution for crimes they may have committed while performing their official duties as chief executive. Clarence Thomas wrote a concurring opinion in which he raised the probability that the job of special counsel violates the Appointments Clause of the Constitution. So, in Judge Eileen Cannon's ruling, which threw out the classified documents case, she at least 3 times cited Clarence Thomas's opinion about how the special counsel's office violates the Appointments Clause of the Constitution. To be clear, just so I know this is difficult to understand, but so is presidential immunity. And if we don't understand it, I mean, look what happened. Look what's happening to this country. Let me just be clear about Eileen Cannon's ruling when she threw out the classified documents case. The court never ruled that the Office of Special Counsel violates the Appointments Clause of the Constitution. That was just Clarence Thomas freelancing ideas. He wrote a concurring opinion on presidential immunity, and he threw in this idea that the special counsel office isn't constitutional. And he's been doing a lot of this lately. He'll write a concurring opinion on, say, the overturning of Roe, the Dobbs decision, and then he'll suggest, it's probably time to start looking into overturning previous court decisions, like the one that legalized same-sex marriage, or the one that legalized the sale of condoms. Nobody asked. He just tosses these ideas into his concurring opinions. And Judge Eileen Cannon, who is not qualified to sit on the bench, picked up on Judge Thomas's concurring opinion. Eileen Cannon's decision to toss out the classified documents case is not rooted in legal precedent. It's based entirely on Clarence Thomas spitballing ideas. Hey, I'm just throwing this up the flagpole to see if Judge Alito's wife salutes. And she will, because she loves her flags. We are dealing with a Supreme Court right now capable of anything. In order to protect Trump, they may decide Jack Smith's office is in fact unconstitutional. How will they arrive at that ruling? This is what we're up against. This is going to get really boring for about 4 minutes. So I've got to warn you, but this is what we're going to be looking at in about 6 months when the Supreme Court takes up the constitutionality of the special counsel. Okay, some background here. There are two types of prosecutors working for the Justice Department. One is called a superior officer. The other is an inferior officer. A superior is someone like Merrick Garland, our Attorney General. A superior is any one of the 93 U.S. attorneys working underneath him in districts throughout the country. Those are superior officers, which means they are nominated by the president and must be approved by the Senate. That's according to the Constitution. An inferior, that's the appointments clause of the Constitution, which Clarence Thomas was writing about. What is an inferior officer? Well, within the Justice Department, that would be all the other lawyers, all the other prosecutors who require no Senate approval. They answer to a superior officer who was nominated by the president and confirmed by the Senate in compliance with the Constitution's appointments clause. Okay? So, in the Thomas opinion cited by Judge Eileen Cannon, he suggests that the job of special counsel, that would be Jack Smith's position, Thomas suggests that job rises to the level of U.S. attorney. And therefore, Attorney General Merrick Garland lacks constitutional authority to appoint Jack Smith or any special counsel without Senate approval. Clarence says it violates the appointments clause, and he suggests that the job of special counsel was never established by an act of Congress. Therefore, it is illegitimate. Other people beg to differ, but this is what we're going to be arguing. This is what's going to happen. Okay, because Donald Trump has at his disposal hundreds of millions of dollars from donations to his Save America Super PAC, he will be tying all of this up in court for the next decade. The courts, therefore, are not going to save us from Donald Trump because he has way too much money. The only thing that will save us from Donald Trump is making sure he's defeated in November. Let's now return to the election interference case in Washington, D.C., which Jack Smith jump-started on Tuesday. To refresh my memory, not yours, mine, because I can't keep any of this straight. So this is for me, just to refresh everybody's memory. Earlier this year, Trump's lawyers took the Washington, D.C. election interference case all the way up to the Supreme Court, arguing Trump, like any ex-president, enjoys immunity from prosecution. Well, it was an absurd claim, laughable, and the Supreme Court should have never taken it. But this is the most corrupt Supreme Court in modern American history. They not only took the immunity case, but they dragged their feet, waiting until the last possible moment to issue a ruling that delayed the election interference trial even further by saying ex-presidents enjoy some immunity for crimes they may have committed while performing official acts as president. So to stretch this out in the service of Donald Trump, they kicked the entire case back down to the lower court for clarification, which means it now has to climb after Judge Tanya Chutkan, who is presiding over the case, after she teases out what is an official act and what is an unofficial act, then it has to climb its way back up to the Supreme Court. going through the appeals process. Maybe it'll leapfrog directly from Tanya Chutkan's courtroom straight to the Supreme Court, but it didn't the first time. So who knows when, after Tanya Chutkan teases out, parses official acts from unofficial acts, who knows when the Supreme Court will hear that case. The court, in its opinion, in June, ruled that Trump is immune from being charged with attempting to mobilize the entire Justice Department. They ruled, I talked about this earlier, it's unbelievable. The Supreme Court, these guys, these six, ruled that President Trump is immune from being charged with attempting to mobilize the entire Justice Department to assist him in overturning the 2020 presidential election. They said that was an official act of president. It's incredible. It's incredible. Like I said, the court kicked the rest of that case back down to the Washington, D.C. courtroom where it originated, right? So Tanya Chutkan is the presiding judge, and she, along with the special counsel, Jack Smith, and Trump's attorneys are now mandated to hash out which parts of the indictments could survive further Supreme Court scrutiny. Because of these six conservative justices on the board, this will be like a long, drawn-out yoga position of legal contortions guaranteed to tie up all of Donald Trump's prosecutions in the appeals process. This will last well into Donald Trump's 80s. Now, you think I'm overstating this, okay? All right. I'm going to go over some things with you. Jack Smith is persisting. Now, he has new indictments Tuesday. Why? Okay? Why did he issue superseding indictments in the election interference case on Tuesday? Evidentiary hearings were expected to begin in Judge Tanya Chutkan's courtroom before the superseding indictments. She was expected to shape the old indictments to make sure they conformed to the Supreme Court's immunity ruling. She was charged with teasing out any whiff of official acts from these indictments. But now there are superseding indictments, which may speed up the process. Why did he do this? Okay, he took out the charges against Trump for trying to coerce the Justice Department, how Trump dragoons several low-level Justice Department officials to spread the lie of election fraud. The Supreme Court said that's an official act. In these new indictments issued on Tuesday, Jack Smith dropped it. He's not going after Trump for trying to coerce the Justice Department. So with this court, we could end up waiting until June of next year, theoretically, on whether they are even going to hear the challenge to Judge Tanya Chutkan's ruling on these new indictments. With this effing Supreme Court, we could end up waiting until the end of 2025 before they even rule on whether any of Jack Smith's new indictments are constitutional and whether this trial can even begin. And of course, now Trump's lawyers are going to go before the Supreme Court because of Judge Eileen Cannon down in Miami, her ruling that throws out the classified documents case. Trump's lawyers are now going to head up to the Supreme Court arguing that the job of special counsel violates the appointments clause of the Constitution. I'm about to give you a roadmap here. Gird your loins. When it comes to Donald Trump having access to unlimited money for his legal defense, the wheels of justice don't spin slowly. The wheels of justice have 4 flat tires. Be prepared. Roughly 2 weeks ago, we were expecting a mini trial to take place inside the Washington, D.C. courtroom, Judge Tanya Chutkan's courtroom. We were expecting this mini trial to take place sometime before Election Day. This is before the superseding indictments on Tuesday. So Jack Smith was expected to stand before Judge Tanya Chutkan and present evidence proving that none of the crimes Trump is charged with were committed while he was performing his official acts as president. And then something very strange happened. You might remember I reported last week that Jack Smith announced he was going to postpone that mini trial until after Election Day. He was signaling a week ago, and this is what we all thought, that if Harris wins, then the 4-year process, she'll have 4 years as president, so Jack Smith won't be fired, so he can then attempt to put Trump on trial. We thought he was postponing the mini trial, the evidentiary hearing, because he figured if Trump wins, which is not going to happen, then Smith would go through the motions of attempting to stage a trial until the end of January when Trump would be sworn in, and then Trump would immediately shut down the entire investigation and have Jack Smith hanged for treason. So what happened last week when Jack Smith signaled, we're letting the election interference case, we're leaving it dormant until after the election, and then suddenly, Tuesday, this shocking announcement of superseding indictments that toss out all the other indictments. He had a grand jury that we didn't know about. We have brand new indictments that supposedly conform to the Supreme Court's ruling. So what happened? Well, it was a feint. It was a fake. He was faking it. Jack Smith was faking everybody out, trying to catch Trump's lawyers unaware, which isn't too hard to do. What was the thinking here? Well, we can pretend Jack Smith is above politics, but his job is predicated on who wins in November. If, God forbid, Harris loses, Special Counsel Jack Smith will be out of a job and hanged for treason. So, what's going on? Whether you like it or not, Special Counsel Jack Smith reads the polls. Smith obviously decided to jumpstart the trial because he realized, you know what, it's looking like I got at least 4 more years to bring Donald Trump to justice. So that's why on Tuesday, Trump was caught off guard with this revised 4-count superseding indictment that Jack Smith will argue addresses all the concerns of the Supreme Court. They're all the concerns of the Supreme Court's immunity ruling in June. Jack Smith said yesterday with these new indictments, he would waive demands that Donald Trump be arraigned before a judge. But he is asking for a pretrial hearing to be scheduled soon. It looks like Jack Smith is now asking for a court date before Election Day. A week ago, he wasn't. Now he is. There's no indication yet if those hearings are actually going to be held before Election Day. Again, the timing of Jack Smith's superseding indictments yesterday suggests he knows Trump isn't getting reelected. Jack Smith is sensing, I have job security let's get this trial started sooner than later. Now, this is really important. The Washington Post reports Smith's new indictments are in compliance with what the Justice Department calls the 60-day rule. The 60-day rule, which makes it official policy for U.S. attorneys not to indict politicians 60 days before an election. The 60-day rule in the Justice Department is not to be confused with Chris Christie's 60-day rule, which says if a slice of pizza has been lying on the ground for fewer than 60 days, it's fair game. And he's fair game because he was Donald Trump's debate coach 4 years ago, even though he knew exactly who Donald Trump is. Okay. Why did I bring up the 60-day rule? Smith handing down these new indictments with exactly 10 days to go before that Justice Department rule kicks in suggests he wants pretrial hearings to start before November 5th. It suggests that Jack Smith is reading polls and expects to be the special counsel long after Inauguration Day, and he wants to get started attempting to lock Donald Trump up. Trust me when I tell you this. It's going to take more than 4 years to even think Donald Trump is going to prison. It may take 4 years for the trial to even start. Okay? You know, one of the things that causes anxiety, depression, and disappointment is expecting the impossible. And then when it doesn't happen, we get dispirited. Okay? So let me give you an idea now of what kind of clock we're looking at and why after Trump loses in November, he can expect to spend most of his 80s in and out of court racking up hundreds of millions of dollars in legal fees. Okay? This is why Trump will be looking at prison time in his mid to late 80s. Okay? I'm telling you the truth. I'm leveling with you. This is what's going to happen. Let me tell you about Contragate, just to give you an idea of what you're up against. Okay? In March of 1987, stay with me on this, please, because it'll help your mental health. This is where we're going, okay? Harris is going to win, and then this is what's going to happen. Let's go back to March of 1987, when we learned that President Ronald Reagan ordered Colonel Oliver North to sell arms to Iran in exchange for the release of American hostages. This is Contragate, which may be one of the single most important scandal in American history. Okay? Reagan, in 85, ordered Oliver North to take proceeds from an illegal arms sales to Iran, right? The government wasn't allowed to sell weapons to Iran. They had just taken hostages. They took the embassy hostages. But Oliver North was ordered to go ahead, sell weapons, sell weapons to Iran. And then the money from that illegal sale of weapons would be used to fund the Contras who were attempting to overthrow the duly elected Sandinistas who were in charge of Nicaragua. They were Marxists, but they were duly elected. And the Contras were trying to overthrow them. Okay? Ronald Reagan was not allowed to sell arms to Iran without permission from Congress. It's against the law. Even worse, after he sold those arms illegally to Iran, he wasn't allowed to take the profits, okay, and hand them over to the Contras. The Boland Amendment had just been passed, which specifically forbid Reagan from providing weapons and training to the Contras as they waged their civil war against the duly elected Sandinista government of Nicaragua. It was against the law for the CIA and Oliver North to give money to the Contras. By taking the illegal proceeds from the illegal arms deal with Iran and then giving that illegal money to the Contras, Reagan was circumventing Congress's power of the purse and violating the Boland Amendment. They specifically said, do not help the Contras. There were innumerable impeachable offenses here, and Reagan should have been removed from office. But the political will just wasn't there. Democrats were turning chicken shit, and they were afraid to remove Reagan from office, especially since he was the first Republican president elected after Richard Nixon. And the Democrats didn't want to look like they were going to impeach or try to impeach every Republican who's elected president. They felt at the time it was a bad look. Meanwhile, the Republicans are trying to get Joe, I'm not making this up, they're trying to get an impeachment in for Joe Biden at the last minute. I'm not making that up. So the other excuse Democrats gave privately for not impeaching Reagan was he was very close to an arms treaty with Russian leader Gorbachev, and they didn't want to jeopardize it. They didn't want to impeach him. They just didn't want to do it. So a very good argument could be made that the Supreme Court didn't really have to rule back in June that a president couldn't be tried for crimes committed while performing official acts as chief executive. It was already implicit because, as you're about to see, a president has pardon power. Problem with Donald Trump is in order for him to shut down all these criminal investigations, Donald Trump would have to pardon the entire country. But normal presidents have pardon power to strategically shut down any investigation and make sure that they don't spend their post-White House years in court or in prison. Okay? This is why Contragate is really important. It's worse than Watergate. It's worse than Russiagate. Russiagate never would have happened if the Democrats punished Ronald Reagan and impeached him for Contragate. But I'll get to what George Herbert Walker Bush did. And what he did set the table for his idiot son and war criminal, along with Dick Cheney, to wage illegal wars in Iraq and Afghanistan without worrying about criminal prosecution. So let's go back to Contragate. Just to give you an idea of the time frame that Trump and Special Counsel Jack Smith and you and I are looking at after Trump loses in November. Be prepared. Are you ready? Okay. U.S. Deputy Attorney General Lawrence Walsh was named independent counsel, not special counsel. They had independent counsels back then. We may have to reauthorize that law. Okay? Attorney General Lawrence Walsh was named independent counsel in December of 1986, okay, to investigate Contragate. 1986, okay? He indicted dozens of Reagan officials, including Caspar Weinberger, Reagan's Secretary of Defense. This was intense. In fact, Reagan's own national security advisor, Bud McFarlane, was the only Reagan official willing to accept legal responsibility for Contragate. He admitted his guilt. Within months of the appointment of the independent counsel, Walsh, McFarlane attempted suicide. He took an overdose of Valium. He knew how bad this was. McFarlane died 2 years ago. Okay, the criminal investigation looking into Contragate began in 1986. Ronald Reagan left office in January of 1989, and the Contragate trials were still going on. George Herbert Walker Bush, the former CIA director who became Reagan's vice president, who should have been indicted for the role he played in Contragate, George Herbert Walker Bush became president in January of 1989. He beat Michael Dukakis. Okay? So, 1986, Walsh began the investigation. George Herbert Walker Bush became president in 89. He lost to Bill Clinton in 92. Okay? By 1993, by January of 1993, as George Herbert Walker Bush was leaving office, the Contragate trials were still winding their way through the courts. The prosecution began in 1996. 7 years later, the trials were still going and no end in sight. Bush, right, lost to Bill Clinton in 1992. So with Bush leaving office in January of 1993, the former head of the CIA, George Herbert Walker Bush, took it upon himself to pardon everyone from the Reagan administration who was indicted for Contragate. He didn't pardon himself, but he didn't need to, because when you pardon your co-conspirators, you've purchased their silence. So it took 7 years for independent counsel Lawrence Walsh to issue his final report on Contragate. After the pardons in 93, George Herbert Walker Bush, by pardoning everybody, he shut down the independent counsel's office. Lawrence Walsh couldn't do his job, so he issued his final report 7 years into his investigations. And in that report, Lawrence Walsh complained, I can't finish this job because of the pardons. 7 years, and the independent counsel was still complaining, I'm not done yet. 7 years in, he says, I can't finish the job, and then complained that George Herbert Walker Bush's pardons have made it impossible to get to the bottom of Contragate. Are you ready for what? I'm just telling you this to give you an idea of what the next couple of years are going to be like with Donald Trump. We're talking about a 7-year investigation that hadn't even begun yet that was shut down. The independent counsel, Lawrence Walsh, in his report suggested that President George Herbert Walker Bush issued those pardons on his way out of the White House to prevent himself from being indicted after he left office. Lawrence Walsh, the independent counsel, suggested that he was prepared to indict George Herbert Walker Bush after he left office for the role he played in Contragate. The independent counsel pretty much said, I would have indicted Bush had he not purchased the silence of his co-conspirators by pardoning everyone. Lawrence Walsh still could have prosecuted George Herbert Walker Bush, but everybody got a pardon, so he wasn't going to win. George Herbert Walker Bush was staring at an ex-presidency tied up in the courts fighting off indictments. Bush and the independent counsel both knew it was settled law after Nixon versus Fitzgerald, which I think was 1982. The Supreme Court ruled that, yes, ex-presidents can be tried for crimes they committed in the Oval Office, which is why George Herbert Walker Bush, on his way out, shut down the entire Contragate investigation by pardoning everyone involved with Contragate except himself. So, let's be realistic here. Let's not live in a fantasy world. Is Donald Trump going to end up in prison? What is he, 78? Let me know what you think in the comments section down below. I read all your comments. Do you think if Trump didn't have $100 million to spend on legal fees, do you think he'd be in prison already? What do you think? Does the conservative wing of the Supreme Court genuinely believe ex-presidents should be immune from prosecution, or do they believe Donald Trump should be immune from prosecution? I have to wrap this up. I'm trying to do more shows, and they're supposed to be shorter, so I have to wrap it up. Let me get this. Okay, I want to return to the Justice Department's 60-day rule, where they refuse to indict a politician 2 months before Election Day. Okay? It's worth noting that one of the chief reasons Hillary Clinton lost to Donald Trump in 2016 was due to FBI Director James Comey's decision. I think that I may have altered his face, because James Comey is not a hero. I know we like to think he's a hero, but he's not. He's a bad guy, a self-righteous, pompous narcissist. One of the reasons Hillary Clinton lost to Trump in 2016 was FBI Director James Comey's decision 11 days before the 2016 presidential election to write a public letter advising Congress that he was reopening his investigation into Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's use of a private email server. Comey had closed that bullshit investigation in July of that year, but he did it publicly. He closed the investigation publicly. That was unprecedented. The FBI never holds a press conference to announce that it's closing an investigation. It doesn't even acknowledge it has an investigation going on. You only know there's an investigation if they want to press charges. But if they're shutting down an investigation, nobody is supposed to know. Because in this country, we're innocent till proven guilty. So if the head of the FBI holds a press conference to announce that there's been an investigation and we're shutting it down, it leaves the opportunity for mischief, for people on Fox News to say, oh, Hillary put the thumbs, forced Comey to drop the investigation. The FBI is never, ever allowed and never does announce that it's closing an investigation. It just closes it. But Comey, who's a bad guy, self-righteous, pompous, he took it upon himself in July of 2016 to hold a big press conference announcing he wouldn't recommend charges against Hillary Clinton for her email service. But then he took it upon himself to chastise Hillary Clinton for her quote-unquote reckless behavior. That was reckless behavior. The FBI director chastising the Democratic nominee for president? When you're saying, I'm not going to charge her with the crime, but her behavior was reckless, that was reckless. And Obama should have fired Comey immediately for that. The FBI either brings charges or it doesn't. The FBI never announces it's not bringing charges. And the FBI director never, ever chastises the subject of an investigation when he's not bringing charges against them. But this was Hillary Clinton, who had long become a political punching bag. And Comey, he violated all rules of procedure and decorum by holding that press conference in July of 2016. He gave ammunition to Donald Trump. The arrogance and recklessness to admonish the Democratic nominee for president without bringing charges. Then, with just 11 days to go before the 2016 election, FBI, this pompous blowhard, head of the FBI, James Comey, this pompous blowhard, announced 11 days before the 2016 presidential election, he announces new evidence has come to light, forcing him to reopen the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email server. He didn't say what the evidence was. He left everything just vague enough to shed doubt on Hillary Clinton's trustworthiness. Now, Comey was warned by the Justice Department to hold off on that letter. He was advised of the Justice Department's 60-day rule, right? 60 days before an election, we don't prosecute, we don't charge any politicians. But James Comey, not being a U.S. attorney, decided, I'm not subject to the official policy coming out of the Attorney General's office. And so he went ahead with that announcement just 11 days before the 2016 presidential election. He announces, I'm reopening a criminal investigation into Hillary Clinton's use of her email server. There were plenty of Americans on the fence in 2016, especially in swing states, who were looking for a reason not to vote for Hillary Clinton. And Comey delivered it to them on a silver platter. Now, did that cost Hillary Clinton the election? Many people believe it did. Now, remember, Hillary lost in 2016. She won the popular vote, but she lost Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, the blue wall, She lost that by less than 1 percentage point. For whatever reason, the Clintons were perceived by some as untrustworthy. Bill Clinton was impeached for perjuring himself under oath during the Paula Jones deposition, who he most likely sexually harassed. And a lot of voters decided something just wasn't right about Bill and Hillary, especially because there was a vast right-wing conspiracy to create that impression among voters. We know that there's truth and there's perception. We know that perception is more powerful than truth. And Comey, the head of the FBI, by making that announcement 11 days before the presidential election, this vague announcement that he's reopening an investigation into Hillary Clinton's criminal activity, that helped feed the perception, without any evidence, that Hillary Clinton couldn't be trusted. Of course, after Trump won the Electoral College and became president, that bullshit investigation into Hillary's email servers was closed down because there was never any there. It was Benghazi. By the way, and this is why James Comey is such a bad guy, it wasn't until March of 2017, after Donald Trump was elected, that FBI Director James Comey finally acknowledged that there was an ongoing FBI investigation looking into Russia's attempts to interfere with our presidential election in 2016 in order to make Donald Trump president. Crossfire Hurricane, that was the FBI investigation, James Comey's investigation into Russian interference. That began in July of 2016. But did James Comey ever hold a press conference in 2016 in the lead up to the presidential election, announcing that he was looking into the role Vladimir Putin and Russian operatives are playing, attempting to get Donald Trump elected in November? See, that was real. Hillary's email server, that was garbage. Russian interference, real. He didn't hold that press conference. Instead, he held a press conference announcing, he publicly issued a public statement that he was reopening the investigation into Hillary Clinton's email server 11 days before the 2016 presidential election. Crossfire Hurricane, wouldn't touch that. But Hillary's email server, that was a political football, and Comey wanted to play with it. Not going to bring up the sanctity of our democracy, the threat that the NRA, how Putin was a straw donor to the NRA, which funneled $30-40 million that we know of into the Trump campaign. Comey kept his mouth shut about that. Read the Mueller report. Mueller says read the report. There's no question that Putin worked to get Trump elected in 2016. I have a lot of liberals, Democrats, leftists who insist Russiagate is a nothing burger. They never took the time to read the Mueller report. They didn't follow it closely enough. Putin helped get Trump elected in 2016. And Comey helped by announcing he was reopening his bullshit investigation into her email server. And we eventually discovered that Ivanka, Donald Trump, Jared, practically everyone in Washington uses a private email server, but that didn't matter. And now, because of James Comey and Russian interference, instead of a 6-3 conservative majority, instead of a 6-3 liberal Democratic majority, we've got a 6-3 conservative majority sitting on the Supreme Court. Okay? Had Hillary won, gotten reelected in 2020, did you see her speech at the DNC last week? If she had won and gotten reelected right now, there would be a 6-3 liberal majority on the court. We're looking at a completely different country. So later, after all was said and done, in his book, and then they did the HBO series, Jeff Daniels played him as a hero and convinced us that we should love the FBI. Later, in his book, Comey explained he made the announcement 11 days before the election because he had it on good authority that Hillary Clinton was going to beat Donald Trump by a landslide. He figured he would have to serve as FBI director in her administration. They have either 6 or 12 year, they overlap. So if a president nominates and he gets an FBI director confirmed, the terms are such that they overlap into future presidents. So he was going to serve as FBI director, he assumed, in the Hillary Clinton administration. And in his book, he explains, I wanted to create an adversarial relationship before she was elected in order to brush off accusations that he suppressed any evidence in the lead up to her victory. He didn't want anybody to accuse him of suppressing evidence that would have been politically damaging to her. Right? He wanted full disclosure. He was reopening the email server investigation so that Republicans couldn't accuse him of suppressing any evidence before the election that would have been detrimental to Hillary. Convinced Hillary was going to win by a landslide, Comey, 11 days before the election, made this announcement to prove, to plant his flag on that hill and declare himself independent from his future boss, Hillary Clinton. That decision was the height of arrogance, naivete, and stupidity. James Comey is a Republican. He, of all people, should have known, watching Hillary's 12-hour testimony before the Benghazi committee earlier that year. He, of all people, should have known that once she became president, there would be nothing James Comey, as FBI director, could do to stop Republicans from accusing him and the entire FBI of covering up all of Bill and Hillary's imaginary crimes. He thought he could tame the Republican beast 11 days before the 2016 presidential election. Imagine an FBI director being that stupid, thinking that there's any logic to the Republican attack machine. So is that why Hillary lost? One of the reasons. There's a whole suite of reasons. Hillary lost partly because of James Comey's press conference in July of 2016 and his decision 11 days before the 2016 election to announce he was reopening the investigation to Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton lost partly because of Putin's interference. There's no question Vladimir Putin was interfering in the 2016 presidential election. And she lost partly because she didn't campaign hard enough in those three crucial battleground states: Michigan, and Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. So why am I bringing up Comey? Why am I talking about the 60-day rule? Partly because Special Counsel Jack Smith observed it by issuing his superseding indictments on Tuesday, right? Which was in compliance with the Justice Department's 60-day rule. I bring up Comey because 11 days before the 2016 presidential election, the head of the FBI was convinced Hillary Clinton was going to be our next president. He looked at all the polls, and he has field offices all over the country. He spoke to all his advisors. It was settled law 11 days before the 2016 presidential election that Hillary was going to be James Comey's new boss, and he took it upon himself to establish his own independence by reopening the investigation and creating an adversarial relationship with his future boss. Get to work. Don't take anything for granted. You know, I am a cheerleader. You know that. But I'm telling the truth. She's going to win. There's going to be a landslide. But we thought that in 2016. Get to work. There's a lot of good news. But there was a lot of good news back in 2016. I'm David Feldman, reminding you to stay strong and protect the weak. September 10th, Debate Watch Party. I'm going to do another one. It's going to have better results than the last one. We had a nice time, but then we had to watch the debate. But I'll fill you in on the details in a few days about the Debate Watch Party. This has been the mop-up for August 28th, 2024. I'm David Feldman in New York City. Thank you for watching this. Please share this episode. This is a grassroots podcast. I need you to share this so people can find out about it. Thank you to Bob in the chat room, everybody in the chat room, for the civil conversation. Leave a comment. I read all your comments. If you would like a free transcript of today's episode, go to shopdavidfeldman.com, and those free transcripts are made possible by people who buy garbage. I'm playing with After Effects. This is altered content. This isn't real. I made this. During an election season, you have to show full disclosure. I know a lot of people think you're looking at J.D. Vance. That is what J.D. Vance sees when he looks in the mirror, but it's not really what J.D. Vance looks like. Please go to shopdavidfeldman.com and look at the merchandise, get a free transcript, a free Harvard diploma, pick up a worst-case scenario coffee mug, and please share this. I'm doing more shows. I'm going to do a lot more shows in the lead-up to the election. I will see you all tomorrow. Thank you for listening. I know this was dry. I know I went over a lot of stuff. So if you stuck with me all the way, God bless you. Thank you. I know it's tough. It's tough. Thank you.